All right, over the weekend, the governor of Georgia responding to the announcement by Major League Baseball that the All-Star game would not be played in Georgia. Here in part is what he had to say.
Georgians and all Americans should know what this decision means. It means cancel culture and partisan activists are coming for your business. They're coming for your game or event in your hometown. And they're coming to cancel everything from sports to how you make a living. And they will stop at nothing to silence all of us.
Well, earlier today, Senator Marco Rubio pointed out the hypocrisy of Major League Baseball. He asked the question, will Major League Baseball now end its engagement with nations that do not hold elections at all, like China and Cuba? So why single out Georgia? Most likely it's because they are listening to what the left is saying about a bill that it either has not read or they are intentionally misportraying. Well, joining me now to talk more about the Major League Baseball's announcement is the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp. Governor, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. Good afternoon.
Well, Governor, at first I just want to ask you your reaction to Friday's announcement by Major League Baseball.
Oh, it's just devastating. I mean, they have completely caved to the cancel culture, woke politics, if you will. Really frustrating for a lot of baseball fans like myself, a lot of the kids that were looking forward to that in Atlanta, and a lot of the small business owners that are up in Cobb County in the metro Atlanta area. I mean, the economic impact is going to be huge, and it's ridiculous. It's all based on a lie that Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams has been spreading, I guess, before they even read the bill.
Yeah, I want to get into a couple of the particulars in a moment, but I want to go back to Capitol Hill for a moment because earlier today, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, also released a statement saying, "We are witnessing a coordinated campaign by powerful and wealthy people to mislead and bully the American people." Do you agree with that?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, they have alternative motives here. I think several of them, quite honestly. I mean, these organizers, if you will, are profiting off of this effort, raising, millions of dollars and taking money from billionaires to push this false narrative that's out there. Regardless, I don't think they really care what the bill actually says. This playbook was written weeks ago before the final version of the bill came together and before I signed it into law when they preserve the domain name Jim Crow 2.0. I thought it was very poignant, if you will, of Leader McConnell to point out that even Joe Biden, besides calling this law, Jim Crow 2.0, he called the filibuster Jim Crow 2.0, even though he and the Democrats used the filibuster to block, Tim Scott's legislation on police reform and anti-lynching legislation. So, it's really condescending to the American people and the hardworking folks around our country and around our state. But I do believe it is a woke-up call, if you will. People are really opening their eyes to this. I mean, if you can't keep sports out of politics, especially Major League Baseball, what's next? And that was really my charge to people, not only in Georgia but across the country. We've got to unite against this cancel culture. It's ridiculous, especially when we have a piece of legislation that's going to expand voting opportunities, especially on the weekend early. And you compare that to states like New York, where Major League Baseball is headquartered. We have 7 days more of early voting than New York does. Yet the commissioner's worried about holding an event in Georgia. And, I thought the comments that Senator Rubio and Cotton and others have made about the Major League Baseball connections to China and Cuba are very interesting as well.
I want to get into some of the particulars. You mentioned, this is really a slap in the face to the working people of Georgia. Well, that's one of the issues that Joe Biden has said, that this keeps the working man from voting. But obviously he hasn't read the bill.
Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, if you really look at the nuts and bolts of the bill, and also the thing that's been interesting is over the last several days, there's been a lot of information that came out on what the legislature was doing in this piece of legislation, and also why, fixing mechanical problems that were seen in the last election. and also just the facts of what the bill actually does. 134 of 159 counties will actually be offering more early voting hours or more election hours than they were in the last election because of the way this bill levels the playing field, if you will, on hours of operation. I mentioned the expanding the opportunity for people to vote with 2 mandatory Saturdays in Georgia now. So the whole argument about what President Biden would say about keeping working men and women from voting, well, obviously, if we were doing that, we wouldn't be adding an additional Saturday that people could vote on in conjunction to the one that was already mandatory, giving counties the option, if they would like, and this is their choice, they could add either 1 or 2 Sundays where people could actually vote. And his whole thing about the whole 5 o'clock and all that has been fact-checked. Even the Washington Post gave him 4 Pinocchios on that. And that's the thing. I mean, you've got these people literally that have been lying about what is in this legislation to drive an agenda, I think in some ways to pass H.R. 1 and S.R. 1, which is an unconstitutional takeover and a federalization of elections in our country.
I think you're absolutely right. Let's talk for just a moment. When you compare the working man, let's say in Delaware or New York, how do their election laws and procedures line up with what you're proposing in Georgia?
Well, I know in New York we have a week more of early voting than they do in Delaware. Obviously, I just mentioned the weekends. I mean, in New York, I'm sorry. In Delaware, I don't think they even have early voting. If they do, it's not as many days as we are. And also in New York, you have to have an excuse to vote absentee, and in Georgia, you do not. And that's the thing that's so condescending. We've got side-by-side comparisons that we can get that you can post up for all your listeners and viewers that, will really shed a light on all of this and really show you that Georgia, has ample opportunities for people to participate in elections here. Also, a lot of the measures in the bill, whether it's replacing an antiquated, arbitrary signature process for absentee ballots and using a voter ID, which is free in Georgia if you don't have one. We've been using voter ID to vote in person since the mid-2000s. 95 and 97% of the people have already done that, so they act like we're, creating a hardship. That is not the case. There's other ways to get your absentee ballot if for some reason you can't or don't have the voter ID. We're securing drop boxes. The other side is crying foul saying we're taking drop boxes away. We've never had drop boxes in the statute in Georgia. They were done by emergency rule by the state election board because of the pandemic in 2020. So if we had just done nothing, drop boxes would still they would not be available in Georgia because they weren't in the statute. We've actually added them for the first time ever. Some counties last election didn't have drop boxes. Now every county will have at least one. And the other thing is they won't tell you is that any voter can just take their ballot. If they get an absentee ballot, they're worried about mailing it, they can take it and hand it to the local elections official at the elections office or a precinct. So, people are just not telling the truth. It's hard to really come out and say that the President of the United States is lying about this bill, but that's exactly what he's doing.
I just want to mention on the boxes, the voter drop boxes, that was one of the issues in the November election where those were funded by a non-government entity, which raised some concerns. And other states are actually looking at that as well as borrowing that outside money from coming in and placing selectively those boxes. Of course, they're criticizing the voter ID, which about 12.5 states have voter ID laws. Now, this may be a reach for you, Governor, but I want to ask you this question, Governor Kemp. Looking over this in the last couple of weeks, as this has been front page headline news, what is the most glaring example of the hypocrisy that you've seen from the left on this bill?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just, when the president comes out and says things that aren't true and is criticizing the great state of Georgia, comparing this to a Jim Crow law and voter suppression is ridiculous when his own state does not have ample opportunities. I've challenged a lot of the mainstream media to just go up there and compare Delaware with Georgia, and especially on our early voting opportunities. It's not even close as to who's got more opportunity to vote.
Well, Governor,
I think it's
I want to thank you for coming on. We're out of time, but I want to thank you for coming on. I also want to thank you for the statement you made in your release over the weekend that you're not going to back down. You're going to continue to fight despite the lies of the left. And that's important, not just to Georgians. That's important to voters all across the country, because if you back down, other states will not stand their ground in defending the integrity of elections. So I want to thank you for doing that.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely, Governor. Anytime.